Howdy, and welcome back. I'm Steven, and this is FWP Reviews. Ladies and gentlemen, it's race week. As some of my viewers may know, the Formula One season wrapped up this past Sunday, and needless to say, I'm devastated. Tomorrow, I'm going to take a trip down memory lane and revisit some of my favorite childhood racing movies. These include Speed Racer, Cars, the Need for Speed movie, The Fast and the Furious, Days of Thunder, Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby, and Herbie Fully Loaded. All these movies are rewatches, seeing as they're some of my favorite childhood movies, and they are in no particular order. I'm going to outline what makes a great racing movie to me, and then I'm going to examine how each of the movies does in each of these categories. These categories include the racing, of course, the story, the banter/jokes, and the characters. Without further ado, I bring you Race Week. I will be starting with the most divisive, but probably my favorite movie on the list, Speed Racer. In the history of racing movies, I've seen that pretty much all of them are divisive in their own right. I mean, in fact, it's almost become a meme at this point. However, none have ever topped the Wachowski sisters' Speed Racer in divisiveness. The racing in this movie is absurd, but that's what makes it great. This movie has some incredible visuals, and at the time of release, many people hated the visuals. With hindsight, I can see that these effects are amazing in their own special kind of way. The visuals really complement the racing well. The bright colors create excellent scenery for the absurd raceways. The speeds at which these cars are traveling in this movie is far greater than any actual racing car, and somehow the racing captures that. For these reasons, I say that Speed Racer has some of the best and most entertaining racing, albeit a little bit absurd. The story in this movie is admittedly dense. I will also mention that racing movies in general do tend to err on the dense side. In the case of Speed Racer, I almost didn't mind it in a way. It was dense with exciting racing as well as exciting subplots. The story is incredibly dense, but I never really found it that hard to follow. It's exciting to watch and complements the absurd racing in a very special way. The banter is definitely not the strongest part of this movie. The banter stems a lot from the corporate level, and there are no real on-track rivals for Speed. This opens up the door for the rivalry with his ghost brother, Rex. I found this to ultimately be very effective. The jokes are nothing spectacular, but they're never bad. The characters are solid despite the ridiculous names. I mean, Speed Racer, as a name? Admittedly, Speed is one of the strongest characters because he's really the only one that gets extremely fleshed out. The effective arc and character building that Speed is on somewhat makes up for this fact. I will now move on to one of my most formative childhood racing movies, and that movie is Cars. The racing in Cars is some of the most interesting. The animation looks great, and the racing mostly reflects this. I found it to be an effective balance between real racing and what one might expect from animation. That meaning a little sillier and made to be more entertaining. I think it walked this line well and made for some very entertaining racing. The story in this movie is an effective mashup of many stories. We see comeback elements along with hotshot rookie elements as well as many others. It also effectively talks about slowing down and enjoying life for what it is. As a whole, it's effective, emotional, but still very entertaining. The banter and the jokes in this movie are iconic. There are so many good-spirited rivalries. The banter and rivalries give these characters an effective path to grow. The rivalries between the actual three racers ups the ante and makes for effective banter setup. The jokes are great, but the hidden adult jokes in traditional Pixar fashion are stellar. The characters in this movie are absolutely iconic. I wish that some of the characters from Radiator Springs had a less ornamental role, as I feel like a lot of them had an effective story that could have been pushed. Mater, Lightning McQueen, Doc, Sally, and Chick Hicks are all fleshed out somewhat, and it makes for an effective setup. Their characters add a lot to the story, and their arcs are very effective. Lightning McQueen's arc in the movie is by far the most compelling, but that's to be expected as he is the main character. This third movie is a true racing classic, The Fast and the Furious. Yes, The Fast and the Furious. No, not Fast and Furious. That's the fourth movie. It doesn't make any sense. Nothing about this franchise makes sense, I know. Anyways, It has long been argued that the Fast and Furious franchise needs to return to its street racing roots. This movie by far has the most racing out of the series, but I want to point out that there's still not a lot of racing in this movie. There's a lot of cops, criminal underworld elements, and a whole lot about family. The racing is a bit unrealistic, but it holds up pretty effectively. Nobody, and I mean nobody, can complain about that final race. I mean, chef's kiss. The story in this movie is foolproof and it held up pretty well to today. The bonds we build take center stage in this movie. It creates for effective moments as we see the birth of this iconic family. The banter is a little corny, but it's ripe with nostalgia. It shows the bonds being built that would define the franchise for years. The jokes are pretty iconic and I find myself quoting them pretty regularly. The characters are iconic. I feel like side characters like Letty and Mia could have been fleshed out a lot more in this movie. However, Ryan and Dom's rivalry to friendship is one of the most iconic in history. It remained very effectively on screen until the tragic passing of Paul Walker. And now we're on to a movie I remember more fondly than I probably should have, the Need for Speed movie. The racing in this movie is pretty solid and there's a lot of it sprinkled throughout. The cross-country trip also has some enjoyable speedy moments. However, it does get a little ridiculous like the Fast and Furious, as it is obviously trying to emulate that franchise. I think the racing is solid nonetheless and takes a pretty effective central role. The story in this movie is compelling, albeit a little bit corny. The problem isn't as much the story as it is the steps between that and when you finalize a movie. Something about this movie's delivery as a whole just didn't sit quite right. I think some moments did capture the tone it needed to, though. I think the ending in particular caught the spirit of what this story should have been thematically and story-wise. The banter isn't great, and neither are the jokes. It feels like we've taken 20 steps back with what this movie puts forth. Some of the moments with Dino are pretty well equipped, but we never see anything special come out of these either. The naked scene is also a lot less funny than I remember it being. The characters in this movie had a really good chance to be great. They've got a few things going for them, such as how good they are acting. Unfortunately, the writing let them down in pretty much all regards. The revenge plot, the love story, and many more arcs in this movie had a lot of potential. The writing was just not a strong enough force to reconcile all of these elements. In a way, it kind of went for everything, and some moments worked really well because of this. The performances are mostly to thank for this, though. Now, we're talking about Top Gun. What's this? We're talking about the NASCAR Top Gun, Days of Thunder. The racing in this movie is somewhat entertaining and somewhat realistic. It's an ineffective middle ground because I can't really compliment the accuracy and I can't really compliment the entertainment either, so it kind of is just The story in this movie feels very familiar. The story in this movie is pretty cliche, but that doesn't mean it's not entertaining. The story has some pretty effective moments despite it definitely having some cons. The second half trades entertainment for more compelling moments. I think this mostly slower second half is a great way to run up to the final race. The banter and jokes in this movie are pretty A+. It captures the spirit of NASCAR from that era pretty effectively. Looking back, it's easy to see how erratic some of the racers were acting back then, but in the movie it's easy to laugh off and find entertaining. Characters in this movie are interesting. The rivalry between Rowdy and Cole is one of the best in the 7 movies. The rivalry to friendship line in this movie is very effective. It plays out in a somewhat believable way. The competitive spirit of racing is shown off through their rivalry very well as well. The scene where they're trying to race in their wheelchairs very effectively showcases this. And now we're on to the penultimate movie. The video's momentum is going well, and we're on to Herbie Fully Loaded. The racing in this movie is infuriating. It's 100% fantasy, but somehow tries to act like it's grounded in some sort of reality. And for that, it is unforgivable. Story in this movie is somewhat valuable. The messages are great, however, they are very poorly delivered. The banter and jokes in this movie are lackluster. There's nothing to be too offended by, but nevertheless. The characters in this movie are compelling, and by characters, I mean character, that being Maggie, who is still only somewhat compelling. Alright, sorry I sped through that last segment, I didn't want to get too sad again. Now, we're on to one of the best and most unique movies on this list, and that is Talladega Nights, The Ballad of Ricky Bobby. Talladega Nights is an exaggeration if I've ever seen one. Because of this, the racing can obviously come off as a bit exaggerated. It's ridiculous and full of logical errors, but nobody can complain because some of the funniest moments come from that. The story in this movie is surprisingly compelling, albeit a little ridiculous. The rags to riches, the fall from fame, the comeback story, the buddy comedy, all rolled into one very effective package. There's a lot going on in this movie, but it balances it effectively by not overloading certain parts. It is mostly divided into separate segments where each of the different story styles can play out, and that is both interesting and effective. The story moments that are built on satire are also very effective. The banter and jokes in this movie are not only amazing, they are absolutely iconic. The banter between Ricky Bobby and John Gerard is some of the best in racing movie history. Shake and Bake, Sweet Baby Jesus, You Ain't First, You're Last, and many other effective jokes come from this comedic goldmine of a movie. The characters are goldmines in and of themselves, as they set up very comedic moments as well as effectively push the story forward. Ricky Bobby is the man at the center of the action, and nobody could have picked anybody better than Will Ferrell for the role. John Gerard is the foil of Ricky Bobby and provides for the best jokes in the movie. Cal Naughton Jr. plays the always second place best friend. His rise to the top in the middle of the movie is a great addition. With that, I bid you farewell. I'll see you all on Sunday for a review of the Small Axe film series. Until then, this is FWP Reviews signing off. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.